Cheers, everybody. Welcome back. And today we are covering chapter 7 in Psycho-Cybernetics. This chapter is called You Can Acquire the Habit of Happiness. So let's begin. In this chapter, I want to discuss with you the subject of happiness, not from a philosophical, but from a medical standpoint. Dr. John A. Schindler's definition of happiness is a state of mind in which our thinking is pleasant a good share of the time. From a medical standpoint, I do not believe that a simple definition can be improved upon. It is what we are talking about in this chapter. Happiness is a good medicine. Happiness is native to the human mind and its physical machine. We can think better, perform better, feel better, and are healthier when we are happy. Even our physical sense organs work better. Russian psychologist K. Kekiev tested people when they were thinking pleasant and unpleasant thoughts. He found that when thinking pleasant thoughts, they could see better, taste, smell, and hear better, and detect finer differences in touch. Dr. William Bates proved that eyesight improves immediately when the individual is thinking pleasant thoughts or visualizing pleasant scenes. Margaret Corbett has found that memory is greatly improved and that the mind is relaxed when the subject is thinking pleasant thoughts. Psychosomatic medicine has proved that our stomachs, liver, heart, and all our internal organs function better when we are happy. That's what I've been talking about lately, and there's much more research has been done since the time this book was published on this. And, when we're in those stress, fight or flight modes of being and our nervous system's dysregulated, our genes expression isn't at the most cellular level, at the smallest level, we're unable to repair our bodies. They talk about autophagy, which is our cell's ability to repair themselves. And when we're constantly in this state of chronic stress, our bodies can't do that. It's the same like they talk about with fasting. Well, the body's not sending all that energy to digestion, so the body has a chance to repair itself. The free radicals, they get cleaned while we're asleep, while we're in that state of rest. So if we're constantly in these fight or flight zones, our body doesn't have the chance, and it leaves us more predisposed to disease and deterioration. Thousands of years ago, wise old King Solomon said in his Proverbs, "A merry heart doeth like a good medicine, but a broken spirit drieth up the bones." It is significant, too, that both Judaism and Christianity prescribe joy, rejoicing, thankfulness, cheerfulness as a means towards righteousness and the good life. Harvard psychologists studied that the correlation between happiness and criminality and concluded that the old Dutch proverb, "happy people are never wicked," was scientifically true. They found that a majority of criminals came from unhappy homes, had a history of unhappy human relationships. A 10-year study of frustration at Yale University brought out that much of what we call immorality and hostility towards others is brought about by our own unhappiness. That's what you see too with people. And that's why I am so adamant about believing people when they show you who they are, because as much as you want to think the best of somebody and apply somebody like Neville's teachings and the teachings of people who are in the manifestation space, there's also many teachers that discuss this. I've mentioned recently Florence Scovel Shinn, Vadim Zeland, a lot of the New Thought teachers. They understand this fact. Don Miguel Ruiz, they all say, and then in the Four Agreements he says, take nothing personally, because when people are expressing hostility towards you, when people are vengeful and vindictive and harboring sort of all these hatred, judgments, all these lower level emotions, trying to project guilt, project their own BS onto you, it's more about them than it is about you. It's much more oftentimes. And so, and you can begin to discern this too. It's like there's a big difference between constructive criticism, if somebody's genuinely wanting to, help make the relationship better, or they're just attacking you and lashing out at you. Right. So it's brought about by our own unhappiness. So when you're in relationships with people and they're just doing that, you can begin to see that it's because they feel empty inside. It's because they are deeply, deeply unhappy inside. That's why they say, hurt people hurt people. And it's not to say that you should never be wanting to improve relationships with people, even if they've been through traumatic experiences. But it is to have that discernment to say, hey, look, is this somebody that is willing to go on that journey and actually improve things and improve their own state of being, or am I just barking up the wrong tree here? Dr. Schindler has said that unhappiness is the sole cause of all psychosomatic ills and that happiness is the only cure. The very word disease means a state of unhappiness, dis-ease. We can see how this ties together, right? A recent survey showed that by and large, there's a lot of words in language that when we unravel, they begin to share and show us what's really going on. Like programs on a TV, you're being programmed. Television, telling a vision. They're telling you their vision of things, their version of things. Channels, it's like it's being channeled. It's really crazy when you begin to study these words that we have and what's really going on here. So just another side note here. By and large, optimistic, cheerful businessmen who looked on the bright side of things were more successful than pessimistic businessmen. It appears that in our popular thinking about happiness, we have managed to get the cart before the horse. Be good, we say, and you will be happy. I would be happy, we say to ourselves, if I could be successful and healthy. Be kind and loving to people, and you will be happy. It might be near to the truth if we said, be happy, and you will be good, more successful, healthier, and feel and act more charitably towards others. And that's what it is when we talk about smile. You must smile before the mirror can smile back. That's why the journey of manifesting, or the journey of growth, of spiritual growth, the journey of self-development, it all begins with the inner work, working with the self. Because when you begin to radiate that joy and harmony within yourself, that's when you begin to see it reflected in the external, in the outer world. Once you begin to change the inner world from within. Common misconceptions, as within so without, about happiness. Happiness is not something that is earned or deserved. Happiness is not a moral issue, any more than the circulation of blood is a moral issue. Both are necessary to health and well-being. Happiness is simply a state of mind in which our thinking is pleasant a good share of the time. If you wait until you deserve to think pleasant thoughts, you are likely to think unpleasant thoughts concerning your own unworthiness. Happiness is not a reward of virtue, said Spinoza, but virtue itself. Nor do we delight in happiness because we restrain our lust, but on the contrary, because we delight in it, therefore we're able to restrain them. I used to have this kind of issue along growing up, and I mean, we probably all do to some extent, thinking that we don't deserve happiness until we've achieved some sort of external thing. And that's what's being said here, is that once we begin to feel that we deserve happiness from within, once we deserve to exist in that state and vibrate at that frequency and really just radiate what we choose. Again, it goes back to choosing our thoughts. That's why affirmations, that's why visualization and all these tools are so helpful, is because we begin to consciously decide, I'm making a decision that I'm going to be happy. I'm going to look on the bright side of things today. I'm going to wake up on the right side of the bed. I'm going to be grateful. And when we begin to do this and operate from this, we begin to see that there are more things to be grateful for. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. The pursuit of happiness is not selfish. Many sincere people are deterred from seeking happiness because they feel it would be selfish or wrong. Unselfishness does make for happiness, but not only gets our minds directed outward, away from ourselves and our introspection, our faults, sins, troubles, unpleasant thoughts, or pride in our goodness, it also enables us to express ourselves creatively and fulfill ourselves in helping others. One of the most pleasant thoughts to any human being is the thought that he is needed, important enough to help and add to the happiness of some other human being. However, if we make a moral issue out of happiness and conceive of it as something to be earned as a sort of reward for being unselfish, we are very apt to feel guilty about wanting happiness. Happiness comes from being and acting unselfishly as a natural accompaniment to the being and acting, not as a payoff or prize. If we are rewarded for being unselfish, the next logical step is to assume that the more self-abnegating and miserable we make ourselves, the more happy we will be. This premise leads to the absurd conclusion that the way to be happy is to be unhappy. Yeah, I mean, you see people do this a lot. And it becomes like a vicious, a constant cycle of inflicting guilt on yourself. And yeah, it just turns into a very destructive cycle. Is there any moral issue involved? If there's any moral issue involved, it is on the side of happiness rather than unhappiness. The attitude of unhappiness is not only painful, it is mean and ugly, said William James. We can be more base and unworthy than the pining, pulling, mumping mood, no matter what our outward ills it may have been engendered. What is more injurious to others? What less helpful as a way out of the difficulty? It fastens and perpetuates the trouble which occasioned it and increases the total evil of the situation. Happiness does not lie in the future, but the present. We are never living, but only hoping to live, and looking forward always for being happy is inevitable that we are so, said Pascal. I've found that one of the most commonest causes of unhappiness among my patients is they're attempting to live their lives on the deferred payment plan. They do not live nor enjoy life now, but wait for some future event or occurrence. They will be happy when they get married, when they get a better job, when they get the house paid for, when they get the children through college, when they have completed some task or won some victory. Invariably, they are disappointed. Happiness is a mental habit, a mental attitude, and if it is not learned and practiced in the present, it is never experienced. It cannot be made contingent upon solving some external problem. Exactly. When one problem is solved, another appears to take its place. Life is a series of problems. If you are to be happy at all, you must be happy, period. Not happy because of. Yeah, it's such a great distinction being made. And again, it ties back into the conversation of, as within, so without, because there will always be things. People have this idea that, oh yeah, like wealthy people don't have problems. That's just simply not true. It's very easy to tell by looking at anybody's life, even if they're famous or have these external things. A lot of those people, you see how unhappy they are. And it's because problems always exist. And it's one thing to realize is that you have to claim this happiness regardless of this current circumstance. Accept where you are now, be grateful, and transmute those things into lessons, transmute them into stepping stones, transmute the things going on, the challenges, into a path forward and a path towards growth and towards creating a better life and towards creating the things that you want, all the while smelling the roses along the way, all the while living life and being grateful for what you do have, and making that choice, that knowing that happiness is not going to there's no such thing as just this state of happiness at the end of the road. There is no end of the road. They say that those who think the journey is over are the ones who are truly lost, because it's a constant evolution of life that we're having. I have now reigned above 50 years in victory or peace, said Caliph Abdelrahim. Beloved of my subjects, dreaded by my enemies, and respected by my allies, riches and honors, power and pleasure have waited on my call, nor does any earthly blessing appear to have been wanting to my felicity. In this situation, I have diligently numbered the days of pure and genuine happiness for which have fallen to my lot. They amount to 14. Wow. That's a perfect example, of somebody who achieved all this outward power, and he's saying that he only had 14 days of happiness, right? Happiness is a mental habit which can be cultivated and developed. Most people are about as happy as they make up their minds to be, said Abraham Lincoln. Happiness is purely internal, said psychologist Dr. Matthew N. Chappell. It is produced not by objects, but by ideas, thoughts, and attitudes, which can be developed and constructed by the individual's own activities, irrespective of the environment. No one, other than a saint, can be 100% happy all the time. And as George Bernard Shaw quipped, we would probably be miserable if we were, but we can, by taking thought and making a simple decision, be happy and think pleasant thoughts a large share of the time, regarding the multitude of little events and circumstances of daily living which now make us unhappy. To a large extent, we react to petty annoyances, frustrations, and the like with grumpiness, dissatisfaction, resentment, and irritability purely out of habit. We have practiced reacting that way so long it has become habitual. Again, like these things, they're very observable with other people. It's about realizing that as much as you notice this in other people, if you were to be standing in the room watching yourself, you would see yourself do the same things. Maybe not as much as certain people in your environment, maybe not in the same way, but you are still a creature of habit. And if you are reverting back to these just reactivity, feelings of unhappiness, unworthiness, dissatisfaction, always expressing dissatisfaction, these are emotional patterns, and you are in a hypnotic rhythm of expressing that. And so it takes catching yourself, becoming aware of it first of all, and then changing the behavior, modifying the behavior. And that's why modeling, looking at archetypes and all of those things with NLP can be very helpful. Pattern interrupts, those are essentially interrupting your pattern, interrupting your conditioned response to things. When you react to something, you notice, okay, why is it that, what is it? And then that's a conversation I had recently on the channel with Mark Darian about depth psychology and talking about like, what is the payoff? What is the payoff that I'm getting by dwelling in this reactivity, dwelling in this, victim type of thinking, or just these habitual patterns that I keep playing out? And how is it that I can choose a different thing? How can I get a better payoff by accepting or by choosing to respond rather than react to the situation unconsciously? How can I wake up, as Vadim Zeland says, from the script, see myself and see reality, and choose the way that I want to respond? Take back my power, take back my free will, essentially. Otherwise, we're kind of like NPCs walking around that are just being programmed by the environment, led around by the environment, getting reactive without actually taking back our power and our control over the way that we respond to things. Much of this habitual unhappiness reaction originated because of some event which we interpreted as a blow to our self-esteem. A driver honks his horn at us unnecessarily. Someone interrupts and doesn't pay attention while we're talking. Someone doesn't come through for us when we think he should. Even impersonal events can be interpreted and reacted to as affronts to our self-esteem. I like that word again, the choice to use the affront, because being affronted, another word people could use is offended, but I think affront captures the emotion and what's going on more specifically and more accurately. And I think that when we feel affronted by something, it's like that confrontational energy. It's like, why did they do this to me? All of these examples ring true. Somebody interrupts or doesn't pay attention to you. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. Somebody honks at you for no reason. Somebody doesn't come through for us. Somebody doesn't respond. Somebody ignores us. These are all affronts to our self-esteem. And the bus we wanted to catch had to be late. It had to go in rain when we planned to play golf. Traffic had to get into a snarl just when we needed to catch a plane. We react with anger, resentment, and self-pity. In other words, unhappiness. And yeah, we've just habitually been running that script. We've been running that program. And it's up to us to reinterpret events. Again, it goes back to not taking things personally all the time. Like Don Miguel Ruiz talks about in the 4 Agreements, that most of the time, somebody's honking at you for no reason. It's got more to do with them. All of these situations that he's describing, if you're reaching out to somebody, a friend of yours or whatever, and they just ignore you, well, a lot of the times, again, it's got more to do with what they're up to, what they have going on. Maybe and you don't even know, you're projecting all of this stuff like, oh, they're ignoring me on purpose and they're doing this, and that. Maybe they're also just busy. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they saw it, they didn't know what to say, they put their phone down. And a lot of the times we end up telling ourselves these stories which are contributing to our own unhappiness. When, again, the less that we react and the more that we choose, and so if somebody's ignoring us, we choose to get on with it, choose to, okay, well, maybe I'll talk to a different friend. Maybe this person's, it's not meant to happen right now. And it's always up to us, the way that we interpret things. There's always a million interpretations to something. I've had certain friends in my life that have literally come out and told me like, hey, when we hang out, I get really inspired. And then it's like I go back when we're done hanging out or you're done visiting or whatever. And it's like I get back into like my normal routine again. And it's just like completely falls off, like all the inspiration of hanging out. And, so something like that, it's like they were being transparent with me at the time. But now that I know that, and I reach out to that friend in particular, and he doesn't respond or whatever, it's like, well, I have that information now. I know that there's some aspect of him that maybe he isn't responding to me because it's shining a light on the fact that he isn't necessarily living in alignment with his vision or living in alignment with his goals, or he feels like when he hangs out with me, it makes him feel worse about himself or his situation, because by being around me, he is inspired, motivated to do all these things. And then when he gets around me, it makes him feel even worse because then he doesn't follow through with them, I'm just using that as an example for you guys because there's a million different reasons and you never know what's going on with somebody in their mind completely. You can make guesses and assumptions, but really it's up to you. And so if I know that, I don't have to take it personally. Then if he doesn't respond, for example, well, I know that there's many factors playing on with it. I know that it's much more complex and nuanced of a situation of, oh, he hates me, or oh, he doesn't like me anymore, or oh, he just, there's just so many other multiple layers going on there that it just goes to show how inaccurate a lot of our interpretations of these things are many times. Stop letting things push you around. The best cure I have found for this sort of thing is to use unhappiness' own weapon, self-esteem. Have you ever been to a TV show and seen the master of ceremonies manipulate the audience? I asked a patient. He brings out a sign which says applause, and everyone applauds. He brings out another which says laughter, and everyone laughs. They act like sheep, as if they were slaves, and meekly react as they are told to react. You are acting the same way. You are letting outward events and other people dictate to you how you shall feel and how you shall react. You are acting as an obedient slave and obeying promptly when some event or circumstance signals you to be angry, get upset, or now is the time to feel unhappy. This is exactly what Vadim Zeland talks about in Tufti the Priestess. And this is something that I've had to, we're all on this journey, right? But this is something that's come to my attention a lot over the past year, where it's like, especially in the context of a relationship and somebody snapping at you or somebody trying to get under your skin, now you're allowing them to have that, to do that. What he's saying here, you're allowing them to essentially push the remote control, push your buttons to get you angry or get upset or whatever. And it's easier said than done, but when you realize this is going on, you can make that choice to be, I guess you could say stoic, you could use the word unbothered, you could say calm, remain your composed, using that inner equilibrium I always talk about, maintaining this rather than going off center, especially in the context of relationships. I mean, I can speak, if I can speak on this candidly as a man from my perspective, it's like when I'm in relationships, and it seems like one of the things that, in my experience, it's if a woman can get me emotionally off center, that's what she's trying to do. And then when I've done that and then gotten into arguments, it only makes things much worse. Whereas if I remain in my calm, composed state during the argument, because she's bringing up things that are just, they're like, it doesn't even make sense, like the things that she's bringing up. And so when I get pulled into that energy and I'm like, look, this doesn't make sense, then she interprets that as me being emotionally weak, which doesn't make any sense to me from my perspective, because I'm just explaining my perspective. But then she's like, oh, in her mind, she's thinking, well, why are you explaining yourself? So it's a catch-22. Point being that if we are able to remain more composed and centered in the face of these disagreements, now we're taking our power back. Now we're not allowing ourselves to be led around by the nose like I talk about, to these external signals, these external circumstances. And in that example, she may be acting unconsciously herself. She might not even realize why she's doing this. In fact, she's probably bringing up all of these volatile emotions. It's probably like some sort of subconscious thing going on. But taking that observer mode, remaining the witness to those emotions and maintaining that composure is what is going to lead to an actual solution, if there can be any, or a mutual understanding. It's not getting sucked in and pulled into that emotional argument, because now you've got two people that are emotional, two people expressing emotions, negative emotions, and that's not going to lead anywhere positive. Learning the happiness habit, you become a master instead of a slave. Or as Robert Louis Stevenson said, the habit of being happy enables one to be freed, or largely freed, from the domination of outward conditions. Your opinion can add to unhappy events. Even in regard to tragic conditions and the most adverse environment, we can usually manage to be happier, if not completely happy, by not adding to the misfortune of our own feelings and self-pity, resentment, and our own adverse opinions. How can I be happy? The wife of an alcoholic husband asked me. I don't know, I said, but you can be happier by resolving not to add resentment and self-pity to your misfortune. How can I possibly be happy? Asked a businessman. I've just lost $200,000 on the stock market. Wow, I'm ruined and disgraced. You can be happier, I said, by not adding to your own opinion to the facts. It is a fact you lost $200,000, but it's your opinion that you are ruined and disgraced. I then suggested that he memorize a saying of Epictetus, which has always been a favorite of mine. Men are disturbed, said the sage, not by things that happen, but by their opinion of the things that happen. When I announced what I wanted to be a doctor, I was told that this could not be because my folks had no money. It was a fact that my mother had no money. It was only an opinion that I could never be a doctor. Later, I was told I could never take postgraduate courses in Germany, and that it was impossible for a young plastic surgeon to hang out with his own shingle and go into business for himself in New York. I did all these things, and one of the things that helped me was I kept reminding myself that all these impossibles were opinions, not facts. I not only managed to reach my goals, but I was happy in the process. Even when I had to pawn my overcoat to buy medical books and do without lunch in order to purchase cadavers. I was in love with a beautiful girl. She married someone else. These were facts. But I kept reminding myself that it was merely my opinion that this was a catastrophe and that life was not worth living. I not only got over it, but it turned out that it was one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me. Wow. How often do we see that too, that people go through these situations? I mentioned recently that I was reading Atomic Habits. I've been reading that book by James Clear, and the entire beginning of the book begins with him getting this horrific injury where he almost died. Was hit in the face with a baseball bat. His brain was swollen, his eyes, like everything was completely, he couldn't even see properly for like 8 months after this. And that's what led him down the path of building these successful habits and becoming the person that he is now, having been a best-selling author, but all the things that he achieved in his life. So very interesting, when you see those stories. So the attitude that makes for happiness. It has been pointed out earlier that since man is a goal-striving being, he is functioning naturally and normally when he is oriented towards some positive goal and striving towards some desirable goal. Happiness is a symptom of normal, natural functioning, and when a man is functioning as a goal striver, he tends to feel fairly happy regardless of circumstances. My young business executive friend was very unhappy because he had lost $200,000. Thomas A. Edison lost a laboratory worth millions in a fire with no insurance. What in the world will you do? Somebody asked. We will start rebuilding tomorrow morning, he said. While he maintained an aggressive attitude, but was still goal-oriented despite his misfortune. And because he did maintain an aggressive goal-striving attitude, it is a good bet that he was never unhappy about his loss. Psychologist H.L. Hollingworth has said, that's something that's amazing that we can take away from a lot of these people that are really successful in business, is their ability to be calm in the face of adversity. And yeah, you can see there's so many different stories of this and examples of this, but you see it all the time. Psychologist H.L. Hollingworth has said that happiness requires problems plus a mental attitude that is ready to meet distress with action toward a solution. Much of what we call evil is due entirely to the way men take the phenomena, said William James. It can so often be converted into embracing a tonic good by a simple change of the sufferer's inner attitude from one of fear to one of fight. Its sting can so often depart and turn into a relish when, after vainly seeking to shun it, we agree to face about and bear it cheerfully. That a man is simply bound in honor with reverence to many of the facts that seem at first to disconcern his peace, to adopt this way of escape, refuse to admit their badness, despise their power, ignorance, ignore their presence, turn your attention the other way, and so far as you yourself are concerned at any rate, though the facts may still exist, their evil character exists no longer. Since you make them evil or good by your own thoughts about them, it is the ruling of your thoughts which proves to be your principal concern. So that's a quote from William James. No wonder it was a little bit more wordy. Looking back on my own life, I can see that some of the happiest years were those when I was struggling through as a medical student and living from hand to mouth in my early days of practice. Many times I was hungry, I was cold and ill-clad. I worked hard, a minimum of about 12 hours a day. Many times I did not know from month to month where the money was coming from to pay my rent. But I did have a goal. I had a consuming desire to reach it and a determined persistence which kept me working towards it. I related all this to young business executives and suggested that the real cause of this unhappy feeling was not that he had, or the business executive, had lost $200,000, but that he had lost his goal. He had lost his aggressive attitude and was yielding passively rather than reacting aggressively. I must have been crazy, he told me later, to let you convince me that losing the money was not what was making me unhappy, but I'm awfully glad that you did. He stopped moaning about his misfortune, faced about, got himself another goal, and started working towards it. Within 5 years, he not only had more money than ever before in his life, but for the first time, he was in a business that he enjoyed. Practice exercise. Form the habit of reacting aggressively and positively toward threats and problems. Form the habit of keeping goal-oriented all the time, regardless of what happens. Do this by practicing a positive, aggressive attitude, both in actual everyday situations which come up and also in your imagination. See yourself, in your imagination, taking positive, intelligent action towards solving a problem or reaching a goal. See yourself reacting to threats not by running away or evading them, but by meeting them, dealing with them, grappling with them in an aggressive and intelligent manner. Most people are brave only in the dangers to which they accustom themselves, either in imagination or practice. Yeah, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that visualizing these goals and visualizing the way that he's speaking here, visualizing scenes in which you're met with challenges and then scenes also in which you face those challenges proactively, like he said, with this positive aggression and intelligent manner, and come out the other side and rise to the occasion, that it has a huge impact. And they do this in sports performance. Michael Phelps imagines himself from like 3 different perspectives. First person, where he is just dominating and getting that record time. He imagines himself in the stands, what that looks like when he's winning. And then he also imagines himself if there's a challenge or if something happens, for example, doing those turns they do in the pool, or if something happens and he messes up a bit, and coming out and meeting those challenges that he would face in a race. So he imagines all 3. And there's a lot of people that talk about this, with sports performance in particular. Andrew Huberman talks about, imagining the contrast of that positive visualization, but also the negative visualization, and using that to, much the same way that Maxwell Maltz is pointing out here. So, systematically practice healthy mindedness. The measure of mental health is the disposition to find good everywhere, said that most famous moralist, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The idea that happiness, or keeping one's thoughts pleasant most of the time, can be deliberately and systematically cultivated by practicing in a more or less cold-blooded manner strikes many of my patients as rather incredible, if not ludicrous, when I first suggested. Yet experience has shown not only that this can be done, but that it is about the only way that the habit of happiness can be cultivated. In the first place, happiness isn't something that happens to you. It is something you yourself do and determine upon. If you wait for happiness to catch up with you or just happen to be brought to you by others, you are likely to have a long wait. No one can decide what your thoughts shall be but yourself. If you wait until circumstances justify your thinking pleasant thoughts, you are also likely to wait forever. Every day is a mixture of good and evil. No day or circumstance is completely 100% good. There are moments, facts present in the world and in our personal lives at all times which justify either a pessimistic and grumpy outlook or an optimistic and happy outlook depending upon our choice. It is largely a matter of selection, attention, and decision. Nor is it a matter of being either intellectually honest or dishonest. Good is as real as evil. It is merely a matter of what we choose to give primary attention and what thoughts we hold in the mind. Deliberately choosing to think pleasant thoughts is more than a palliative. It can have very practical results. Carl Erskine, the famous baseball pitcher, has said that bad thinking got him into more spots than bad pitching. One sermon has helped me overcome pressure better than the advice of any coach, he said. Its substance was that, like a squirrel hoarding chestnuts, we should store up our moments of happiness and triumph so that in a crisis we can draw upon these memories for help and inspiration. As a kid, I used to fish at the bend of a little country stream just outside my own town. I can vividly remember this spot in the middle of a big green pasture surrounded by tall, cool trees. Whenever tension builds up, both on or off the ball field now, I concentrate on this relaxing scenes and the knots inside me loosen up. That's from Norman Vincent Peale, book called Faith Made Them Champions. Gene Tunney tells how concentrating on the wrong facts almost caused him to lose his first fight with Jack Dempsey. He awoke one night from a nightmare. The vision was of myself, bleeding, mauled, and helpless, sinking to the canvas and being counted out. I couldn't stop trembling. Right there, I had already lost that big ring match, which meant everything to me, the championship. What could I do about this terror? I could guess the cause. I'd been thinking about the fight in the wrong way. I had been reading the newspapers and all that they said about how Tunney would lose. Throughout the newspapers, I was losing the battle in my own mind. Part of the solution was obvious. Stop reading the newspapers. Stop thinking about Dempsey the menace, Jack's killing punch and ferocity of attack. I simply had to close the doors in my mind to destructive thoughts and divert my thinking to other things. A salesman who needed surgery on his thoughts rather than his nose. A young salesman had made up his mind to quit his job when he consulted me about an operation on his nose. It was slightly larger than normal, but certainly not repulsive as he insisted. He felt that prospects were secretly laughing and repulsed because of it. It was a fact he had a large nose. It was a fact 3 customers called him to complain because of his rude, hostile behaviors. It was a fact that his boss had placed him on probation and he hadn't made a sale in 2 weeks. Instead of an operation on his nose, I suggested he perform surgery on his own thinking. For 30 days, he was to cut off all those negative thoughts. He was completely to ignore all the negative and unpleasant facts in his situation and deliberately focus his attention upon pleasant thoughts. At the end of 30 days, he not only felt better, but he found that prospects and customers had become much more friendly. His sales were steadily increasing, and his boss had publicly congratulated him in a sales meeting. That's a great example right there of mental diet. That is what people talk about when they talk about mental diet in the context of affirmations, in the context of Neville Goddard's teachings. It's simply creating a new diet for yourself and focusing, cutting out all those negative thoughts, replacing them. I wonder if he instructed him to also, right, yes, he said, and deliberately focus his attention on pleasant thoughts. Okay, A scientist tests the theory of positive thinking. Dr. Elwood Worcester, in his book Body, Mind, and Spirit, relates the testimony of a world-famous scientist. Up to my 50th year, I was unhappy, ineffective. None of the works on which my reputation rests were published. I lived in a constant sense of gloom and failure. Perhaps my most painful symptom was a blinding headache, which recurred usually 2 days of the week, during which I could do nothing. I had read some of the literature of New Thought. There it is, New Thought. That's where Neville Goddard and Florence Scovel Shinn and all these people, Joseph Murphy, they are New Thought teachers. That is the overarching kind of group of people at that time that came up with these ideas here, which at the time appeared to be a buncombe and some statement of William James on the directing of attention to what is good and useful and ignoring the rest. One saying of his stuck in my mind: we might have to give up our philosophy of evil, but what is it that in comparison with gaining the life of goodness? Or words to that effect. Hereto, these doctrines had seemed to me only mystical theories, but realizing that my soul was sick and growing worse and that my life was intolerable, I determined to put them to the proof. I decided to limit the period of conscious effort to 1 month, as I thought this time was long enough to prove its value or worthlessness to me. So I've got this whole part underlined here. During this month, I resolved to impose certain restrictions on my thoughts. If I thought of the past, I would try to let my mind dwell upon only its happy, pleasing incidents, the bright days of my childhood, the inspiration of my teachers, and the slow revelation of my life work. In thinking of the present, I would deliberately turn my attention to its desirable elements, my home, the opportunities my solitude gave me to work, and so on. And I resolved to make the utmost use of these opportunities and to ignore the fact that they seem to lead to nothing. In thinking of the future, I determined to regard every worthy and possible ambition as within my grasp. Ridiculous as this seemed at the time, in view of what has come to me since, I see that the only defect of my plan was that it aimed too low and did not include enough. Yeah, I love that right there. He then tells how his headache ceased within 1 week and how he felt happier and better than ever before in his life. But he adds, the outward changes of my life resulting from my change of thought have surprised me more than the inward changes, yet they spring from the latter. There were certain eminent men, for example, whose recognition I deeply craved. The foremost of those wrote to me out of a clear sky and invited me to become his assistant. My works have all been published, and a foundation has been created to publish all that I may write in the future. The men with whom I have worked have been very helpful and cooperative toward me, chiefly on account of my changed disposition. Formerly, they would not have endured me. As I look back over all these changes, it seems to me that in some blind way I stumbled upon a path of life and set forces to working with me which were before against me. Wow, that is super powerful. It says Elwood Worcester and Samuel McComb, Body, Mind, and Spirit. How an inventor used happy thoughts. Professor Elmer Gates of the Smithsonian Institute was one of the most successful inventors this country's ever known and a recognized genius. He made a daily practice of calling up pleasant ideas and memories and believed that this helped him in his work. If a person wants to improve himself, he said, let him summon those finer feelings of benevolence and usefulness, which are called up only now and then. Let him make this a regular exercise like swinging dumbbells. Let him gradually increase the time devoted of these psychical gymnastics, and at the end of a month, he will find the change in himself surprising. The alteration will be apparent in his actions and thoughts. Morally speaking, the man will be a great improvement of his former self. How to learn the happiness habit. Our self-image and our habits tend to go together. Change one and you'll automatically change the other. The word habit originally meant a garment or a clothing. We still speak of riding habits, of habiliments. This gives us an insight into the true nature of habits. Our habits are literally garments worn by our personalities. They are not accidental or happenstance. We have them because they fit us. They are consistent with our self-image and our entire personality pattern. When we consciously and deliberately develop new and better habits, our self-image tends to outgrow the old habits and grow into the new pattern. I can see how many patients cringe when I mention changing habitual pattern actions. or acting out a new behavior patterns until they become automatic. They confuse habit with addiction. An addiction is something you feel compelled to do and which causes severe withdrawal symptoms. Treatment of addiction is beyond the scope of this book. Habits, on the other hand, are merely reactions and responses which we have learned to perform automatically without having to think or decide. They are performed by our creative mechanism. Fully 95% of our behavior, feeling, and response is habitual. The pianist does not decide which keys to strike. The dancer does not decide which foot to move where. The reaction is automatic and unthinking. In much the same way, our attitudes, emotions, and beliefs tend to become habitual. In the past, we learned that certain attitudes, ways of feeling, and thinking were appropriate to certain situations. Now we tend to think, feel, and act the same way whenever we encounter what we interpret as the same sort of situation. What we need to understand is that these habits, unlike addictions, can be modified, changed, or reversed simply by taking the trouble to make a conscious decision and then by practicing or acting out the new response or behavior. The pianist can consciously decide of a strike of a different key if he chooses. The dancer can consciously decide to learn a new step, and there is no agony about it. It does require constant watchfulness and practice until the new behavior pattern is thoroughly recognized, thoroughly learned. All right, practice exercise. And here we're rounding out the chapter. Habitually, you put on either your right shoe first or your left shoe. Habitually, you tie your shoes by either passing the right hand lace around by the left hand or vice versa. Tomorrow morning, determine which shoe you put on first and how you tie your shoes. Now, consciously decide that for the next 21 days, you are going to form a new habit by putting on the other shoe first and tying your laces in a different way. Now, each morning, as you decide to put on your shoes in a certain manner, let this simple act serve as a reminder to change other habitual ways of thinking, acting, and feeling throughout that day. Say to yourself as you tie your shoes, I am beginning the day in a new and better way. Then consciously decide that throughout the day, 1, and this is really good right here. I'm gonna leave these down below so you guys can refer to these. At one point I wrote these out and I would recite these every day before I began my day. 1, I will be as cheerful as possible. 2, I will try to feel and act a little more friendly toward other people. 3, I'm going to be a little less critical and a little more tolerant of other people, their faults, failings, and mistakes. I will place the best possible interpretation upon their actions. 4, insofar as possible, I'm going to act as if success were inevitable, and I already am the sort of personality I want to be. I will practice acting like and feeling like this new personality. 5, I will not let my own opinion color facts in a pessimistic or negative way. 6, I will practice smiling at least 3 times during the day. 7, regardless of what happens, I will react as calmly and as intelligently as possible. 8, I will ignore completely and close my mind to all those pessimistic and negative facts which I can do nothing to change. Simple, yes, but each of the above habitual ways of acting, feeling, thinking does have beneficial and constructive influence on your self-image. Act them out for 21 days, experience them, and see if worry, guilt, hostility have not been diminished and if confidence has not been increased. You can see here that I wrote here, legendary, with the date, and I wrote to print these out, and I did write them out and I put them on my wall, and like I said, I would read these daily. And they did make a difference. These are extremely, extremely powerful. So again, this is another example of engaging with the material. This book is not meant to be read in a passive manner. And so I would highly recommend you guys either write these out, print these out, keep them in a note somewhere or whatever, where you were able to read them and engage with this practice for 21 days and watch as you begin to shift. That inner world begins to shift and you begin to dwell on those positive thoughts. These are all written with such a purpose that you're going to start acting like and feeling like this new personality. You're not going to let your own opinion color facts in a pessimistic or negative way. You're going to practice smiling. You're going to react as calmly and as intelligently as possible, no matter what happens. These are all incredible, incredible ways of being. So definitely let me know down below if you guys are committed to doing this. And I would love to also see what you guys notice shift and change by doing this. this example that he had of this salesman that lost $200,000 in the stock market. I mean, when this was written, that must have been millions of dollars. And so by today's standards. And so these things are real. This is very, very legitimate. And this is an incredible exercise to practice. If you guys are, you've heard about wanting to do mental diets or whatever, this is an incredible, tangible practice to engage in where you can reflect upon this at the beginning of your day to engage in that new mental diet and that new habit of where you focus your attention. So with that being said, guys, and then thus you completely change your self-concept. Anyways, guys, much love as always. Drop this with a like, hit me with a subscribe, and in the next video, we're gonna go over chapter 8, which is ingredients of the success type personality and how to acquire them. I'll see you guys in the next video.